Anti-D Law welcomes you to the 7-day course for the LSAT-India. In this course, you will receive 7 lessons each for logical reasoning, analytical reasoning, and reading comprehension. So let's begin with today's lecture. I welcome you to RC5, which is the 5th lesson on reading comprehension. However, before watching RC5, make sure you watch RC4 because RC5 is a continuation of what was discussed in RC4. To watch RC4, you can click on the I button at the top of the screen and watch that here. So you can click on the I button here and watch RC4 first, and then you can get back to RC5. So this video is RC5. Like I said, RC5 is a continuation of RC4, and therefore RC5 would make absolutely no sense to you unless you watch RC4. To watch RC4, you can click the I button and watch the video by clicking on this link. Watch RC4 and then get back here and we'll solve the questions. In RC5, we are solving the questions. In RC4, we had discussed the passage. Okay. So now we'll solve every question in detail. I'll not only give you the right answer, but also explain to you as to why the wrong answer had to be omitted. So it will be slow and I'll give you the details. Once you learn this procedure, you'd be able to apply this easily to other questions as well. Okay. So what matters is not just to get the right answer, but also to know as to how you arrived at the right answer. All right. So let's look at what the question requires of us. Each one of these questions is a type of question. There are not many types of questions, okay? So once you learn the intricacies and the details of the types of questions in just 1 or 2 passages, then you'd be able to solve most passages very easily. So what you see here is that it asks you as to why the author chose bats instead of mice, pigeons or whales to present the main problem of the passage. What that means is you first read this before you look at the options, okay? Wait for the options, first try to make some sense of the question stem, because if you've made no sense of the question stem, then even when you go to the options, you won't be able to make sense. Always create a sense of anticipation, even if it is for the questions, right? So after you've read the question stem, build some anticipation. You should know what you should be expecting in these options here. In your head, you kind of have the right answer. You're just looking for a confirmation in the options. You cannot just simply read this question and then go on and look at the options. What will happen if you do that is that you will read the options, it will make no sense to you, and then you will go back to this, and then you'll have to repeat this process several times over. So to save time, always read and try to build some anticipation. All right. So we are now focusing only on the question stem without looking at the options. As you can see, you will have to identify what the main problem in the passage is, right? Now, what is the main problem in the passage? The main problem in the passage is what we saw in the previous video as well, that I want to know what it is like for a bat to be a bat, right? The problem is that the author wants to know as to what it is like to have the experience of a bat in the manner that the bat feels. This is the main problem. And the second thing, which deals with mice, pigeons and whales, let's just go and pick that in the passage. As you see, we find that area where we see mice, pigeons or whales here. So now why does he pick bats instead of mice and pigeons? And why does he talk of pigeons and whales? So here he's already clarified, and that is what you find in the second paragraph as well as in the first. He says that he could have used any other species. As you can see here, he says that he could have been raised with other species as well, but then he has taken bats for the reason that they have a different sensory apparatus. So he says they have a sensory apparatus that is so different that it makes the problem that he poses more vivid, which means that he chooses bats because they are more different from mice, pigeons or whales. But he says, like with other species, we do believe that bats have experience. So bats are mammals, bats have experience, we agree, but they are very different, and therefore it serves as a good example for him to raise his point. Now that we've understood this, let's have a look at the options one by one. Let's look at option A. It says because bats are very similar to us, and it would be very easy for us to imagine what the state of a mind would be like. You see, he is not saying that it is easy. This is completely wrong. On the contrary, he says that it is very difficult because they are not very similar. Second, let's look at option B. He says because they are mammals and people are willing to accept that mammals have experience. You see, we are here trying to see as to why he chose bats versus the others, right? Now all of these are mammals. So we want to see not what is common between them, but what is the difference, right? So when you say because they are mammals, then essentially you are focusing on what is similar, whereas our focus has to be on what is different. And therefore I can eliminate option B as well. Let's look at option C. It says because mice, pigeons or whales are more closely related to bats than us. This is in fact factually wrong when you look at the passage. He says that bats are more closely related to us than the other species. So what is true is actually the exact opposite. Here you'd see that he says that bats are more closely related to us, and here he says that mice are more closely related. Therefore I will have to eliminate option C as well. That leaves us with option D. Let's have a look at what option D has to say. It says that because the habits, behavior, sense organs are very different from ours, yet people are willing to believe that they have experience. Yes, this is the right answer. We are saying that bats have experience, yet they are very different, and therefore bats are a good example for this. So I hope you get the idea. You have to first identify the main problem, and then you see as to why why bats have been chosen over the other three species. As you can see, this question requires you to have an understanding of the entire passage, and that is why it's important for you to not go and look for the answer in just simply one place. It is more important for you to have a holistic view, and then of course go back to that one particular area where you find things. You must go back to this place, but you must also have an idea of what is given in the rest of the passage. So this is a straightforward question. You see the word alien here and you find the word alien here, right? So now you have to see as to what the meaning, the contextual meaning, right? So there's a meaning. So alien generally means that it has come from another country or another planet or whatever. But when you look at alien in terms of the context, you have to see the contextual meaning and not necessarily only the objective dictionary meaning. Okay, so what is the word alien as used in the passage mean? Does it mean from another country? No, because he does not talk about countries. Unfamiliar and disturbing. Well, this looks like a good option. If you have a look at what he says here about bats, he says that anyone who has spent some time in an enclosed space with an excited bat knows what it is to encounter a fundamentally alien form of life. So it's unfamiliar and perhaps disturbing as well, because when you're in an enclosed space with an excited bat, so this looks like a possible good option. Let me retain it. Then we look at the next option after this, from another planet. Again, for the same reason as this, it is not. Hypothetical or fictional. You see, bats are not fictional. Bats are real. They are different but real. Therefore, it is not hypothetical or fictional, and therefore the answer to this is the option B. So in this third question, we are to see as to what the author is most likely to agree with. What that means is that the right option will be something that has been said in this passage by the author, right? Okay, let's go for it option by option. Let's start with the first option, option A. It says that we will only understand bats if we understand the chemical process behind echolocation. You see, understanding bats is not something that we want to do. That's the first thing. We are not here to understand bats. We are here to understand the experience of bats or experience of other species, right? So the focus is not on understanding what the bat wants or understanding bats, but on the experience. So that's the first point, on the grounds of which I would say that this is very vague. First point. The second thing is, that the chemical processes has not been spoken of. They are not talking about intellectualizing and understanding the chemical process. Perhaps we know the chemical process and the physical process of biological echolocation. We perhaps know it. But the point is whether we can sense it and whether we can feel it. So in fact, what he says here is that if we understood it, then what we might only be able to do is to perhaps understand how it behaves. So we can get an idea of how to behave as a bat behaves, but we cannot get the main point, which is about getting the feeling of what it is like to be a bat. And therefore I can eliminate this option. So A is not the answer. Okay. Let's look at option B. Option B says that the experiences of other species are not worth wondering about since our sense organs are different. Now, whether it is worthwhile to think about bats or not is not something that has been stated here. He has not said whether it is worth our while or whether it is not worth our while. In fact, if I were to choose between whether it is worth our while or whether it is not, I'd say that it is, because the author has actually spent so much time thinking about and talking about the experience of other species, right? So therefore this statement is wrong, and therefore I can eliminate option B as well. Let's go to option C. It says that we cannot understand the experiences of other species by relying solely upon our own organs of perception. Now this appears fair. He says that since we cannot perceive sound as they do, since we do not have similar sound sense organs, we cannot understand the experiences of other species. This looks like a good option, so let me just keep it. Let me go to the next option, option D. It says that the experiences of other species are not worth wondering about since we have our own experiences to worry about. You see, like I said, whether something is worth it or not worth it, and whether we have to worry about our experiences is not something that has been discussed in the passage. Never take a point that has not been spoken of in the passage. Okay, so you've been able to eliminate 3 options, and then that gives us our answer as the option C. Okay, you can see that elimination works much better in some cases than actually looking for the answer, because you have to look for the most likely right answer. I cannot have said simply by reading option C that it is the best answer, because you never know, perhaps option D might have had something better. So you cannot arrive at your right answer unless you have also eliminated the other options. Make sure that in questions such as these, you not only pick the right answer, but also eliminate the others, so that you are sure that what you have picked is not only right, but also the best. You are required to choose the best or the most appropriate answer, not a good answer. All right, let's move to the next question. So in question number 4, we are required to see as to which of these options is most similar to the problem that has been discussed in the passage. So obviously we'd have to look at once again the problem discussed in the passage. The problem discussed in the passage is basically this: is it possible for one species, in this case humans, for us to understand as to what the experience of another species, a different species is? He's taken the example of bats, but as you'd see in the passage, he said that this problem could have been raised with other species as well. So basically it means bats on the one hand, and it can also be, along with bats, mice or whales and all of these things. So the question is basically this is the problem: one species on the one hand and another species on the other. Now let us see which of these options looks most similar to this. As you can see, you can't necessarily eliminate an option one at a time. You have to look at all 4, and then you have to pick the odd one out, right? As you can see, if I say doctor and engineer, okay, if I look at a citizen of India and a citizen of Sri Lanka, if I look at cricketer and footballer, you see whether a person will be a doctor or an engineer, whether a person would be a citizen of India or Sri Lanka, whether he would be a cricketer or footballer, is not something that is determined at birth. It is not a a matter that is determined by genetics, right? These are external things. So whether a person would be a doctor or engineer is not something that is determined by birth. Likewise, the same can be said for citizen of India and citizen of Sri Lanka and footballer. Whereas when you see this one, the option B, a person of one race, what it is like to be of another race, it may not be a very good example, like I said, but it definitely is the best example. You see, amongst the options, it is the best, although I could say that it is not very good. It's not perhaps in absolute terms a very good option, but under the circumstances, it is the best option that is available to you, because race is something that is determined at birth. You do not have control over it. Just as one species does not have control over what it would be, it cannot be someone else. Whereas the same species can be a doctor or an engineer, whereas a person of one race cannot become a person of another race. And therefore, this is the best option because it is most similar, and therefore you can go with the answer as option B. It's important for you to remember, you are here to pick the best option. Even if the best is not very good, you have to pick it. Also, if you have 4 good options, again you must understand that you will have to eliminate something which is not as good as the best option. So this is a question in which we are looking at the main point of the passage. And to identify the main point of the passage, I think in this passage is very simple. You look at the main question. He wants to know as to what it is like for a bat to be a bat, right? So this is the main question. And the answer to this main question becomes perhaps the main point of the passage. So is it possible to know as to what it is for a bat to be a bat, given that I'm a human? His answer is no. It is not possible, because no matter how hard he tries, so he says here that he tries, he is still restricted by what his mind knows, and therefore he cannot do it. So this is the main point of the passage. Now that we've understood this, let us have a look at our options. Okay, let's look at option A. Option A says that humans will never understand sonar or echolocation since we do not have the biological apparatus for it. Well, humans can understand it, but they cannot understand it in the way that bats do. So I cannot say that this option is completely wrong, but why I will eliminate this is because it is very narrow. Okay, we are not here to only talk about sonar or echolocation. This is to make it very narrow. Whenever you're dealing with the main point, it has to be broad enough to encompass the entire passage. Since this is very narrow and not very precise, I will eliminate this option. Let's look at the option B. Option B says that our imagination is very weak, and unless we make a dramatic effort, okay, he does not say that the human imagination is weak. He says that it is limited. There's a difference between something being limited and something being weak. This is an addition that has been made by this option, and therefore I will eliminate this option as well, because it makes no mention of whether our imagination is weak or not. Okay, it's only limited, it does not mean that it is weak. Let's look at option C. Option C says that while bats may have experience, it is very difficult for us to understand or describe that experience, since our minds and our ways of perception are different from those of bats. Okay, this looks like a good option because he's saying that we cannot understand or describe that experience. It's very difficult for us, that's what he says. And so this can be retained as a good option. Let's look at option D, and then we can know as to whether we have to choose between C and D or whether D gets eliminated. Option D says that bats cannot possibly have experience. Okay, outrightly wrong, because the very first line says that bats have experience. We all agree with this, and therefore I can eliminate option D as well. This leaves us with option C, which is surely our right answer. So I hope you've been able to make some sense of this video, and you've got an idea of how to attempt these questions. There are some general rules that are required to be followed. Do not go for an option that is too narrow or that is too generic or too vague. Whenever you're dealing with the main point of the passage, make sure it deals with the entire passage, and it talks about the essence of the passage rather than just one particular line. Okay, So thank you so much. If you have any questions, you can ask me in the comment section below and I'd be happy to respond.